Enclosure movements, such as the Enclosure Acts in 18th and 19th century England, involved the privatization of common lands, converting them into privately owned property. One notable consequence of these movements was the shift from communal to private ownership, which had significant social and economic impacts. Howdy, I'm just some random nude dude sitting in my closet talking to myself. It's also where I celebrate the power of free thinking and encourage bold ideas. As a society, we're often afraid to challenge the norms and think outside the box. But here, I embrace the unconventional. So sit back, relax, and join me on this journey of exploration, where we embrace our inner nude dude and push boundaries to discover new perspectives. The historical tapestry of enclosure movements, notably epitomized by the Enclosure Acts in 18th and 19th century England, weaves a narrative that transcends time. These movements, characterized by the privatization of once communal lands, not only transformed the physical landscape, but left an indelible mark on the socio-economic fabric of societies. As we delve into the pages of history, the lessons drawn from these events resonate with contemporary challenges, offering valuable insights into resource management, inequality, and sustainable practices. To comprehend the impact of historical enclosure movements, it's imperative to explore the context in which these transformations occurred. Enclosure Acts, for instance, allowed landowners to enclose common lands, altering patterns of land ownership and fundamentally reshaping agricultural practices. The repercussions of these movements extended far beyond England, influencing global perspectives on land use and ownership. Central to the discussion is the concept of the tragedy of the commons, a theoretical framework that warns of the perils of unregulated common resource use. In the context of enclosure, this concept illuminates the risks associated with privatization, emphasizing the need for a delicate equilibrium between private interests and communal well-being. The privatization of common lands during the enclosure movements resulted in a concentration of wealth and economic power. Examining how these processes contributed to social and economic inequalities provides a critical lens through which to understand the lasting implications on communities, particularly smaller farmers and marginalized groups. The transformation of agricultural practices during enclosure movements ushered in an era of mechanization and increased productivity. However, this shift had consequences, displacing traditional farming methods and creating economic pressures on smaller farmers. Exploring this evolution offers insights into the ongoing dialogue between efficiency, sustainability, and the cultural identity tied to agriculture. Beyond historical narratives, the lessons gleaned from enclosure movements provides a roadmap for navigating the challenges of today. As societies grapple with issues of resource management, climate change, and economic inequality, the historical context becomes a source of wisdom, guiding the development of policies and practices that prioritize sustainability, inclusivity, and ethical considerations. In this exploration, we embark on a journey through history and its echoes in the present, seeking not only to understand the past, but to extract meaningful lessons that can inform a more equitable and sustainable future. Enclosure movements, notably exemplified by the Enclosure Acts in 18th and 19th century England, represented a transformative shift in land ownership and agricultural practices. These acts authorized landowners to enclose and fence off common lands that were traditionally used by local communities for farming, grazing, and other communal activities. The motivation behind these movements was multifaceted, including the desire for more efficient agricultural practices and increased profits. The Enclosure Acts fundamentally altered the landscape of rural England. Previously, communities had access to common lands, which fostered a sense of shared responsibility and mutual dependence. However, as these lands were privatized, large landowners gained exclusive control, leading to a significant reconfiguration of social and economic dynamics. This transformation had profound effects on the livelihoods of small farmers in rural communities. Many were displaced from the lands they had traditionally cultivated, contributing to a shift towards more consolidated and large-scale agricultural operations. The enclosure movements also triggered social unrest, as communities resisted the loss of their access to common resources and the subsequent economic hardships. The impact of enclosure wasn't confined to England. Similar processes occurred in other parts of the world, each with its unique historical context. In Ireland, for example, the process of land enclosure exacerbated existing socioeconomic tensions, contributing to the broader issues leading to the Irish potato famine in the mid-19th century. The privatization of common resources, often framed through the lens of the tragedy of the commons, addresses the risk of overuse when a resource is collectively owned. The idea is that without clear ownership or regulation, individuals may exploit the resource for immediate gain, leading to depletion, like corporations don't do that now. The concept of the tragedy of the commons is a pivotal lens through which to understand the consequences of unregulated use of common resources. Coined by Garrett Hardin, this concept suggests that when a resource is collectively owned without clear rules or oversight, individuals may act in their immediate self-interest, leading to overexploitation and depletion of the resource. In the context of historical enclosure movements, the tragedy of the commons becomes evident. Before privatization, common lands were often sustainably managed by local communities who recognized the shared responsibility for their upkeep. However, as these lands were enclosed and privatized, the dynamic changed. With no communal oversight, the incentive for individuals became to extract as much as possible from the land for personal gain, contributing to overuse and environmental degradation. This phenomenon is not limited to historical instances. It resonates in contemporary debates about resource management. The overfishing of oceans, deforestation, and depletion of water sources are modern-day examples of the tragedy of the commons. In these cases, the absence of clear ownership or effective regulation often results in a race to exploit resources before others do, jeopardizing the long-term sustainability of these vital assets. Understanding the tragedy of the commons is crucial for shaping policies that strike a balance between private interests and the common good. It emphasizes the need for thoughtful regulations, community involvement, and sustainable practices to ensure that resources are managed in a way that benefits society as a whole, rather than succumbing to short-term individual gains. As societies continue to grapple with issues of resource management, climate change, and environmental sustainability, the lessons from this tragedy of the commons remain pertinent. By learning from historical and contemporary examples, we can work towards developing solutions that address the complexities of resource use while fostering environmental stewardship and ensuring the well-being of communities. Historically, enclosure movements contributed to wealth concentration, as large landowners gained control over significant properties, consolidating economic power. This concentration often resulted in the displacement of smaller farmers and heightened social and economic inequalities. The historical enclosure movements, particularly exemplified by the Enclosure Acts in England, played a pivotal role in reshaping the distribution of wealth and exacerbating social and economic inequalities. Privatization of common lands resulted in the concentration of land ownership in the hands of a few wealthy individuals. That's my wheezy dog down there. Large landowners, taking advantage of the newly enclosed properties, gained significant economic power. The consolidation of land under a small elite contributed to the widening gap between the rich and the poor. As common lands were enclosed, smaller farmers in rural communities found themselves displaced. The loss of access to these communal resources meant a loss of livelihood for many. The economic impact was particularly harsh on those who lacked the resources to adapt to the changing agricultural landscape. This displacement further fueled economic disparities and social tensions. The transition from communal to private ownership ushered in an era of agrarian capitalism. The introduction of more efficient farming methods by large landowners increased productivity, but also led to the emergence of a social hierarchy. The divide between wealthy landowners and struggling farmers deepened, contributing to a stratified society where economic opportunities were heavily skewed. Sound familiar? The effects of enclosure movements extend beyond England. In various parts of the world, similar processes led to the concentration of land and resources in the hands of a privileged few, perpetuating a cycle of inequality. For instance, in Ireland, land enclosure exacerbated existing socioeconomic tensions, contributing to broader issues like the Irish potato famine. The legacy of historical enclosure movements is embedded in the long-term systemic inequality that persists in many societies. The unequal distribution of land and resources, initiated during these historical processes, has far-reaching consequences, influencing economic opportunities, social mobility, and access to education and healthcare for generations. Understanding the impact of enclosure movements on wealth concentration and inequality is crucial for contemporary discussions on social justice and economic reform. By examining historical precedents, societies can work towards more equitable policies and practices that address the root causes of economic disparities and promote inclusivity and fairness. The shift from communal to private ownership brought changes in agricultural practices. Large landowners, driven by profit motives, introduced more efficient farming methods. While this increased productivity, it also marginalized smaller farmers who struggled to compete with the scale of the newly enclosed properties. Same things going on in Kansas and Nebraska with corn and wheat, and in ConAgra and those folks. The historical enclosure movements, such as the Enclosure Acts in England, not only reshaped land ownership and social structures, but also brought about significant changes in agricultural practices, with both positive and negative consequences. The shift from communal to private ownership incentivized large landowners to adopt more mechanized and efficient farming methods. This transition led to increased agricultural productivity, allowing for larger yields and more streamlined operations. The introductions of innovations like seed drills and crop rotation marked a departure from traditional farming practices. While the adaptation of modern farming techniques boosted productivity, it came at the expense of traditional farming methods. Smaller farmers who lacked the resources to invest in mechanization found themselves at a disadvantage. The displacement of these traditional practices contributed to the decline of small-scale agriculture and a shift towards more consolidated, large-scale farming. The emphasis on efficiency and scale created economic pressures on smaller farmers who struggled to compete with the productivity of larger enclosed estates. Many were forced out of agriculture altogether, or became dependent on wage labor, contributing to the transformation of rural economies and communities. The push for increased efficiency sometimes had unintended environmental consequences. The focus on monoculture and the extensive use of certain crops led to soil degradation and loss of biodiversity. The prioritization of short-term gains over sustainable land management practices contributed to long-term environmental challenges. The changes in agricultural practices were not just technical, but also brought about by social and cultural shifts. The traditional, community-centric approach to farming, where practices were often tied to local customs and seasons, gave way to a more industrialized and profit-driven model. This shift had implications for the identity and way of life of many rural communities. Examining the historical shift in agricultural practices offers valuable lessons for contemporary agriculture. Balancing the need for increased productivity with sustainable and environmentally conscious practices is a challenge that persists today. The experiences of the past emphasize the importance of considering the social, economic, and ecological impacts of agricultural decisions. As societies continue to grapple with the challenges of feeding a growing population and ensuring food security, understanding the historical context of agricultural transformations can inform more holistic and responsible approaches to modern farming practices. It highlights the need for a balance between efficiency and sustainability to create resilient and equitable agricultural systems. Examining historical enclosure movements provides insights into the consequences of privatizing common resources. It's essential to recognize that the tragedy of the commons warns against unregulated use, and the privatization solution emphasizes responsible stewardship under clear ownership. Striking a balance between private interests and the common good is crucial in contemporary debates on resource management. Examining the historical enclosure movement provides valuable insights and lessons that are highly relevant for contemporary society. The lessons extend beyond the historical context of land privatization, offering guidance on how societies can navigate current challenges related to resource management, inequality, and sustainability. The historical enclosure movements underscore the importance of finding a balance between private interests and the common good. While private ownership can lead to efficient resource management, it's essential to establish regulations and ethical frameworks to ensure that individual gains don't come at the expense of the broader community and the environment. Unbridled exploitation of resources, as highlighted by the tragedy of the commons, can have detrimental effects. Today, as we face global challenges such as climate change and environmental degradation, there's a pressing need for sustainable resource management practices. Learning from historical mistakes emphasizes the importance of long-term ecological considerations in decision-making. The concentration of land and resources in the hands of a few during historical enclosure movements contributed to economic inequality. Contemporary societies can draw lessons from this to design policies that promote a more equitable distribution of wealth. Ensuring access to resources, education, and opportunities for all is crucial in addressing systemic inequality. We're kind of going through a technological enclosure movement right now. The traditional communal use of common lands encouraged a sense of community responsibility. Today, fostering community engagement in decision-making processes, especially regarding resource management, can lead to more inclusive and sustainable outcomes. Empowering local communities to actively participate in shaping policies ensures that diverse perspectives are considered. The transformation of agricultural practices during historical enclosures teaches us about the need for a balance between efficiency and sustainability. Modern agriculture can benefit from integrating technology for increased productivity, while prioritizing practices that maintain soil health, biodiversity, and long-term ecological resilience. One size does not fit all. Historical enclosure movements occurred in specific contexts, and their outcomes were influenced by various factors. While addressing contemporary challenges, it's crucial to consider the unique characteristics of each situation. Contextual understanding enables the development of tailored solutions that address the specific needs and challenges of different communities. The historical shift in agricultural practices highlights the importance of considering the ethical implications of technological innovations. While efficiency is essential, it should not come at the expense of environmental sustainability, social justice, and cultural integrity. Innovation should be guided by ethical frameworks that prioritize the well-being of both people and the planet. The lessons from historical enclosure movements provide a foundation for shaping a more sustainable, equitable, and community-focused future. By learning from the past, contemporary societies can navigate complex challenges with a greater understanding of the interconnectedness of economic, social, and environmental systems. Historical enclosure movements and the privatization of common resources significantly shaped societal structures and economic systems. Acknowledging the risks highlighted by the tragedy of the commons and the potential benefits of privatization prompts essential discussions on how to manage resources sustainably while addressing issues of wealth concentration and inequality. The historical enclosure movements, exemplified by events like the Enclosure Acts in England, offer profound lessons that resonate in the complexities of contemporary society. These lessons, derived from the privatization of common lands, transcend historical boundaries and provide a roadmap for addressing current challenges related to resource management, inequality, and sustainability. The lessons from historical enclosures underscore the delicate balance needed between private interests and the common good. While recognizing the benefits of private ownership and efficient resource management, societies must establish robust regulatory frameworks to ensure that individual gains do not come at the expense of broader social and environmental well-being. In the face of global challenges such as climate change and environmental degradation, the imperative for sustainable resource management is clear. Historical mistakes emphasize the need for forward-thinking policies that prioritize long-term ecological considerations, ensuring the health of our planet for future generations. The concentration of wealth and resources in the hands of a privileged few during historical enclosure movements serves as a cautionary tale. Contemporary societies must address systemic inequality by designing policies that promote equitable distribution of resources, access to education, and economic opportunities for all. The communal use of common lands in the past highlights the power of community engagement. In the present, empowering local communities to actively participate in decision-making processes regarding resource management leads to more inclusive and sustainable outcomes, taking into account diverse perspectives and needs. The transformation of agricultural practices teaches us to balance efficiency with ethical considerations. Modern innovations in agriculture should prioritize sustainability, soil health, biodiversity, and cultural integrity. Ethical frameworks should guide technological advancements to ensure that progress aligns with the well-being of both people and the planet. The historical legacy of enclosure movements serves as a guidepost for shaping a more sustainable, equitable, and community-focused future. By learning from the past and integrating these lessons into contemporary decision-making, societies can navigate the intricate web of challenges with wisdom and foresight. The ongoing dialogue between history and the present provide a foundation for creating a world that values not only progress, but also justice, resilience, and shared prosperity. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you found this video informative and thought-provoking. This is the point where others tell you, if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content just like this. But we know that kind of thing is for losers. Don't be a loser. And as always, I welcome your feedback and ideas for future videos in the comments section below. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep embracing your inner nude, dude.